How you doing? I'm Kevin O'Hara for alcoholmastery.com. Today I wanted to talk about the alcohol industry's propaganda machine, how it affects you and what you can do about it. Now, just like the cigarette industry's propaganda machine, they have one running for years and years and years, and they still have that machine running in different countries. You know, it's been curtailed in the West. You know, we're sort of putting a lot of barriers in the way of cigarette advertising, and you know, they're going into other things now, but you know, at the end of the day, it's still running strong in countries like Indonesia, Belize, Timor, all those kind of poor countries, and the alcohol propaganda machine is running really, really well in the Western countries, in our countries. So in this video we're going to look at what is that propaganda machine. We're going to take a look and compare it to cigarettes and how that propaganda machine compares to the alcohol propaganda machine. And we're going to look at the World Health Organization's Empower measures. These are a bunch of measures that they're trying to implement throughout the world to try and curtail the pervasive nature of cigarettes and how that can be sort of brought into effect with alcohol, and how it compares with what they're doing to alcohol. Now, the definition of propaganda is sort of information that's biased towards a certain point of view, you know, whether that's political, cultural, economic. You know, these days a lot of propaganda is based around trying to get you to buy a product, trying to get you hooked into buying a product. It's often associated with psychological methods of learning, of teaching people, of sort of establishing belief patterns within a population or within, you know, a section of that population. Propaganda is often very loaded. It's one-sided. It's trying to get you to sort of shift your viewpoints towards that point of view. It's in a lot of cases lying by omission. Right, so they're not telling you certain stuff. They're telling you some things, but they're not telling you other things. The whole thing about propaganda is that it's manipulative. You know, it's trying to manipulate an emotional response rather than a logical response. You know, it's trying to attack you and get you to think about things from an emotional point of view instead of sort of thinking about things from a logical point of view and looking into the future and seeing how these things are going to affect you in the future, not just at the moment. You know, seeing how this point of view is going to affect different areas of your life and not just that one specific area. And to look at these things, you know, through emotions. It's how people stir up crowds. You know, it's how people get other people to be racist. It's how, you know, it's how a lot of shit that's happening in the world now is brought about. You know, it's how all advertising works. All good advertising works by getting people to think from an emotional perspective rather than a logical perspective. Now, the alcohol industry's propaganda machine is directed towards alcohol, towards drinking alcohol, and towards that whole life that surrounds it. You know, it wants to portray a positive point of view, right? It wants to portray a normal point of view from the perspective of everyone thinks that drinking alcohol is normal. You know, drinking alcohol every day is normal. Drinking alcohol with your dinner is normal. Drinking alcohol to celebrate is normal. Drinking alcohol to relax is normal. Drinking alcohol to socialize is normal. You know, this is what the alcohol industry wants, is to normalize everyday drinking, everyday consumption of this drug, right? You know, it wants you to think that drinking alcohol is a pleasure, that it adds to your life, that it actually adds meaning to your life. You know, think about it. What meaning does alcohol ever add to your life? You know, you strip out the alcohol from a social situation, what are you left with? You know, really, when you take the alcohol out of the situation, what are you left with? You're left with the social situation. You're left with the whole reason for being there in the first place. You know, the alcohol, they're trying to sneak in the alcohol so that they say, well, the only reason you're there is to have a drink, you know, and having a drink helps you to relax and to be at ease with areas of your life that you wouldn't otherwise be at ease with. You know, when you look at being in a social environment, being with people, you know, with people that you trust, that you love, this is where you feel relaxed. This is where you feel the most comfortable. This is where you feel the most yourself. This is what brings you meaning in your life. But what the alcohol companies are trying to do is to take that whole concept of socialization, of being with your family, of being with the people that you love, of celebrating something of momentous value in your life. They're trying to prize that apart and trying to squeeze in their drug into that and going, well, yeah, I mean, it just makes it all that better. It doesn't make it any better. It makes it fucking worse, because it's a drug. And eventually you start to associate the socialization, you start to associate the relaxation, you start to associate the celebration, all these different areas of your life with drinking alcohol. And you cannot then go into these situations without drinking alcohol. And that's the sadness of it, you know, that, you know, this is the way we are now. You know, you can't see a celebration without them pulling out a bottle of fucking champagne. You know, so the alcohol companies have got double motivation. First, they've got the motivation of trying to normalize alcohol drinking within our society, right? Normalize it so that you feel that at every celebration you want to have alcohol. At every socialized aspect of your life, you need to have some alcohol, right? But at the end of it, what they really want to do is they want to addict you. You know, the more people they addict to their products, the better, you know. They don't have to convince the guy who sat on the bar stool to drink. You know, all the advertising is aimed at people who are not yet hooked on the alcohol, you know. They say that they're not trying to bring in young people, children into this fold, but they are. You know, this is basically what they're doing. You know, when you look at the case of cigarettes, right, cigarettes were exactly the same thing. You know, if you go back far enough, you know, 10, 15, 20 years even, you know, you're looking at the same type of propaganda machine that was involved with trying to get you hooked on to cigarettes. I mean, it's been proven that the cigarette companies were adding stuff into the mix, adding different chemicals. I mean, I heard some ridiculous claim that the cigarette companies at one stage were adding over 1,000 different chemicals. I mean, it could be wrong in that. It could be higher than 1,000. I know it was something ridiculous like that. That they were trying to add. That they were adding 1,000 different chemicals to the cigarettes in order to not only to make them more addictive, but to make them burn better, to make them taste better. You know, all these kind of things to make them a better consumer product, right? And at the end of the day, one of those things was to get you addicted. You know, and I wouldn't put it past the alcohol industry to do that, you know, to try and make it more addictive, more and more addictive. I mean, quitting smoking was one of the toughest things that I've ever done in my life, you know, and a lot of people will tell you the same thing. But, you know, in terms of stuff that can go wrong, you know, in terms of illnesses that can be caused, they're not too far apart, you know, cigarettes and alcohol. I mean, alcohol itself will cause over 200 different conditions. And I'm sure cigarette smoking causes the same thing. I mean, part of the course that I'm doing at the moment is looking at how bones heal themselves and how cigarette smoking can hamper that healing process. You know, just because of what it does to your whole body, to your system. So there's over 200 different conditions caused by smoking, by drinking alcohol. 3.5 million people die every single year from drinking alcohol, you know, and that's not too far behind the 5 million people that are killed from smoking cigarettes. So the World Health Organization call the amount of people that are smoking and the amount of people that are dying, the amount of the cost of smoking throughout the world as a tobacco epidemic. You don't see any of that. I mean, you see them talking about and putting out statistics for alcohol, but you don't see them calling it as an epidemic. As I said, you know, in comparison, 3.5 million for alcohol, 5 million for cigarettes. There's not that big of a difference between the two of them, you know. I mean, combined, you're talking about 8.5 million people a year through legal drugs, and about 250,000 per year through all the other illegal drugs put together, right? And they brought in these measures called the Empower measures, MPOWER, to try and combat that threat. And I just want to go through a few of them now. So one of them is to monitor tobacco use and prevention policies. Now with alcohol, I presume they're monitoring and implementing some prevention policies. I presume it's the same sort of thing that they're doing with cigarettes. The P is to protect people from tobacco smoke. Now with alcohol, I don't think they're doing a great job of protecting people from second-hand effects of alcohol. I mean, everyone knows about the second-hand effects of smoking. People breathing in second-hand smoke. A lot of people have died from working in environments where they've had to breathe in second-hand smoke, in bars and restaurants and stuff like that. In places where smoking was allowed up until fairly recently. But the second-hand effects of drinking are, they're everywhere. Think about, a guy coming home from the pub pissed and he beats up his wife. People going out and kicking the shit out of each other when they're drunk. People just wrecking the place when they're drunk. And doing all sorts of stuff like that when they're under the influence of alcohol. They reckon that over 50% of the crimes are caused, of worldwide crimes are caused because of the alcohol, maybe more. The next point is to offer help to quit tobacco use. Now, you can get help if you're trying to quit alcohol, but it's mostly from your GP, and they'll mostly refer you to some place like the AA. Same with courts. Sometimes you go to court with something if you've done something, especially if it's alcohol related, and they'll say, look, as part of the sentence you've got to get treatment, and they'll force you to get treatment. And usually, again, it's with the AA. The cost to society is roughly the same as the governments have taken in. So, the cost of the medical costs and all that kind of stuff from alcohol are roughly the same cost as what the governments take in from taxation. So if they ban alcohol altogether, which they're never going to do again after the results of prohibition. But if they did ban it again, think about the cost. They've got to still pay out this cost. People who quit now or are forced to quit now, they're still going to have those health consequences, even though they've stopped. The health consequences might stop here and there. The damage might stop, but the consequences that are already there, they're still going to have to be dealt with. So you're talking about having to pay a lot of money out for the foreseeable future without that revenue coming in from alcohol taxation. The W is to warn about the dangers of tobacco. Talking about when they talk about the dangers of drinking, you're talking about mostly it's campaigns for drink driving, and mostly these campaigns are fueled by organisations like the mothers of victims of drunk drivers, right? And they go out and they campaign, and they've got a fairly big lobby now, so they can get a lot of government money pushed towards that area. But I don't see any sort of education towards teaching people the dangers of starting to drink alcohol. It's always about drink 2 or drink 3 or drink 4 drinks a night, and that's your limit. You can't go above that. That's if you go above that, then it's binge drinking. But it's the same thing as saying to somebody, well, a pack of cigarettes a day is not going to do you much harm, or if you smoke 10 cigarettes a day, it's not going to do you much harm, or if it's been medically proven that if you only smoke 1 cigarette every 2 hours, then it's not going to do you much harm. Your body can handle that. You don't hear anything like that. You don't hear that kind of stupid advice. But what the problem with alcohol is, they start off with the notion that alcohol drinking in some form is normal, and then they work from there. So you're never going to get, it's going to take a long time before you start getting the education where people are being educated not to start drinking alcohol. When your teachers are drinkers, then how can you How can you get away from that? You know, how can somebody teach somebody not to take a drug when they're taking the drug themselves? You know, and you know, when you've got doctors are drinking, teachers are drinking, the medical profession is drinking, the legal profession are drinking, you know, the people who make the rules are drinkers, you know, then, you know, things are not going to change, especially from that perspective. You know, it's always, the focus is going to be on don't drink too much, you know. It's like saying, well, don't take too much heroin, you know what I mean? It's a similar thing. The next one is the E, is enforce bans on tobacco advertising, promotion, sponsorship, starting to, you know, with alcohol, but they're not going far enough with this yet, you know. I mean, I'd love to see warning labels on alcohol, but, you know, it's a long way into the future, because you've got such a, you know, with tobacco, it's very easy to do this, right? From the perspective of, you know, all cigarettes are sort of created equal. You know, one brand is perceived to be better than the others, but that's all marketing. And it's marketing as well with the alcohol. But, you know, you've got sort of a lot of lobbyist groups who say, well, you know, they drink 100-year-old malt whiskey, or, you know, 1,000-year-old bottle of wine, or whatever it is, you know. And, you know, you've got such a big disparity between the prices of wine. You can pay $1,000 for a bottle of wine. You can pay more in certain circumstances, certain places. And then you can go out down to your local shop here and you can get a carton of wine for less than €1. So if you were to bring in an alcohol, the same kind of thing where you're putting labels onto alcohol bottles, then you would have to do it across the board, you know, just the same thing as you're doing now with cigarettes. So, and I can't see that happening anytime soon. The next one is I just wanted to say as well about the taxes on tobacco. I just worked it out yesterday that in Ireland, you're paying, a packet of cigarettes costs €11, and that's 78% tax. Now, comparison to wine and beer, there's 48% tax on wine and 30% tax on beer, so a bit of a disparity there. In the USA, roughly you're talking about 42% on cigarettes, so about half the taxation on cigarettes than there is in Ireland. In the UK, it's 82% on cigarettes. In the UK also, you've got 50% on wine taxation and about 30% on beer, so it's equivalent to Ireland, that taxation. The US is a bit more difficult when you're looking at prices for wine and beer, because each state has got their own taxation rules and stuff like that. So I didn't really have the time to go through it. So that was the OR, by the way, which was to raise taxes on tobacco. You know, at the end of the day, it's going to take a long time before this alcohol propaganda machine is shut down. You know, it's going to be weakened gradually over time, but that's going to take a long time. I mean, you know, it's the same way as the cigarette propaganda machine took a long time for it to be closed down, and it's not closed down. Like I say, it is as strong as ever in some of the countries around the world, and you can see them starting to go into alternative industries. You know, I mean, the cigarette companies are heavily into the e-cigarette industry, and you know, you can see them trying to make inroads now into the pot industry. You know, legalized pot is going to be a huge thing, and you know, the cigarette companies are going to get in behind that as well, and you can expect them to be playing dirty tricks and to have this machine cranking out and making you think that smoking pot is a great thing to do as well, you know. But, you know, as I said before, we are our own worst propaganda machines. You know, we're the ones that listen to this bullshit in the first place, and we're the ones that repeat it, and we say it to ourselves, oh, I can't do this, I can't face going out with my friends without having a drink, I can't face doing this without a drink or doing that without a drink, you know. And, you know, we forget the simple fact that, you know, life is about having fun. You take the alcohol out of these situations and you're still going to have fun. You'll have much more fun because you'll remember everything. You'll beat yourself, you know, and that's, I think a lot of the time, alcohol stops us from being ourselves, and we forget what it's like to be ourselves. But you soon get that back. You soon find your voice. You soon find your true self. You know. So it's just a question of doing it, of persisting, and keep persistent until you get there, you know. So look, I'm going to leave it there for now. If you have any questions at all, any comments, then leave them down below. If you want to sign up for the Alcohol Mastery starter pack, then come on up to the website and leave your name and email address. There's a few different courses over there, a couple of different books and the like, you know, all stuff to try and help you to start out on this journey and to break the propaganda. You know, there's a whole course in there on trying to break the spell of these alcohol companies. You know, sort of open up your mind to what's happening. So until next time, I'm Kevin O'Hara for alcoholmastery.com. Take care of yourself. Keep the alcohol out of your mouth. Onwards and upwards. Take care. Bye now.